Well, this is a rare privilege for me. Normally the judges get to ask the lawyers the questions, and now I get to ask the questions. So it's sort of, and there's no red light. So now we have a tough act to follow, Chief, but let's try. So first, I wanted to give a shout out to your wife, Grace Wilson, right there. Thank you so much for coming. Now, you were born in Pomona, California. Your parents were educators. Tell us a little bit about your parents.
So they were both, they met at BU. They were both getting graduate degrees in education there, and they didn't like the cold very much and wound up in Southern California. I only lived in Southern California until I was 7, and they moved because of the smog. My mom couldn't talk most of the days of the year, and her doctor told her, you got to move somewhere with better air, and so we moved to Berkeley.
Well, didn't Dr. King actually, wasn't he at their graduation?
Yes, he was receiving his honorary doctorate at the same time, and my mom was totally blind. And Dr. King stopped and spoke with her for a couple seconds, said something to her. They had a little conversation. She had a lot of little stories like that. Sitting at a bus stop one day, she was talking with Ernest Hemingway, and he was asking her, what do you think about Hemingway? And she loved it. She was an English major in college, and talked with Hemingway for a while before he revealed that he was actually Ernest Hemingway. One of my friends asked, well, how did she know? Which was sort of a good question, but I think she had read enough and heard him enough that she knew.
So tell us, what was it like to have a mom who was blind? That's hard to imagine.
So I was the oldest. This is going to sound odd, I suppose, but it was great. Because I was sort of her constant companion for lots of things, from things as mundane as, what kind of soup is this so I can make dinner, to reading her PhD coursework to her and taking her to her afternoon classes at UC Berkeley to get her doctorate. It was really an amazing experience I wouldn't trade. I remember once we were walking on the street, somebody she didn't know stopped her and said something to the effect of, I'm so sorry you can't see. And she sort of recoiled and said, I'm not sorry I can't see. And I thought about that, at the time and thereafter. I was never sorry she was blind.
She must have had an incredible sense of other senses, I would imagine, too.
She did. It really kind of supernatural in some ways. You could take 4, 5, 6 coins, drop them on a heart surface, and she could tell you exactly what they were. She would walk by certain things and tell you it was a male bot, but she was totally blind, couldn't see anything. But your other senses do get accentuated.
So now you grew up in Berkeley.
And the problem with them both being educators is I got a lot of extra homework. and because she was blind, a lot of the homework was oral. So I would get math problems orally. I would get all kinds of things orally when I got home. And,
Pretty tough.
Tough, but fun in its own way.
So you grew up in Berkeley in the late 60s, early 1970s. That's like the height of the the Vietnam War period, the height of all the stuff that was going on. What was that like?
It was interesting. So we had field trips to demonstrations that my parents nixed one of them, but other times we got taken.
What was that demonstration?
That was an anti-war demonstration at the campus, and my parents called the 5th grade teacher and said, you're not doing that. So she then took us to see these anti-war art sculptures, and the part of Berkeley that is at the water is mud flats. It's really stinky, and it's kind of horrible. But that's where all these sculptures were, so she took the whole 5th grade class out there. We all got stuck. It was like quicksand. And the police had to come with ropes and police cars and drag us all out, and everything we were wearing had to get thrown away. It was just...
First interaction with the law.
Yes, actually. It was.
Now, I understand you originally wanted to be a doctor, but you changed your mind?
So I originally wanted to be an architect, and I realized very quickly I couldn't draw. I couldn't write I still can't write script. And then I thought, well, a doctor would be great. And a really well-meaning teacher in 7th grade took me to the gross human anatomy lab at UCSF Medical School, where they were cutting open cadavers. And I still remember the smell, and that was the end of it for me. I was 11 years old, and that was it. But that did not put me on the road to being a lawyer.
So what happened next?
So what happened next is in 9th grade, I completely freaked out when my English teacher asked me to do, well, it was part of the class assignment. Everybody had to do an oral report, and it counted for 20% of the grade, and I freaked out and said, I'm just not going to do it, just give me an F for that part. And he said, I'm not going to do that, I'll tell you what, if you come back before 10th grade starts and spend the summer thinking about why you wouldn't speak in public and what you're going to do about that, I'll excuse you from it. And at that point, since I was prepared to give him my left hand, I figured this was an even better deal. But I liked him a lot. His name was Francis Metcalf. He was from Hawaii. That's the kind of teacher, if I were a teacher, I'd like to be. And I came back and I told him, and ninth grade was all by itself, on a campus by itself, so there's no reason I really had to come back except that I gave him my word. So I came back and I told him I was afraid of what people would think of me if I spoke in public. They'd make fun of me. They'd think what I said was stupid, and I realized that's not rational. And so what I decided to do was join the speech and debate team, which I did. And it turned out I was pretty good at it.
And that's why you wanted to become a lawyer?
Well, it sort of fits naturally with that set of skills. At least being a litigator, I knew nothing about, I'd never met a lawyer. I think the first lawyer I met was as an undergraduate. I took Archibald Cox's constitutional law class. That's the first time I met a lawyer.
What's your favorite lawyer movie?
I don't like lawyer movies. But
My Cousin Vinny.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. If I had to pick one, it'd be My Cousin Vinny.
Best cross-examination you will ever see.
It's all about the positive attraction.
Now, did you originally think you might want to become a law professor? Your parents were professors?
I did. They were both teachers. And that's what I thought I would do. I thought my dream job would be to get a job at UC Berkeley Law School and teach there.
So how did you end up, someone who'd grown up in Berkeley, at Cravath, Swain and Moore, the quintessential New York law firm?
Well,
which actually predates,
next to S&C, actually.
No, actually I checked today. It predates Sullivan and Cromwell by 60 years, and we started in 1879.
That's true. But quintessential can mean varieties of things. Anyway, this is an embarrassing story, but I think it is very good for people who are public figures, which I regrettably am, to be embarrassed from time to time. So, and it takes a couple minutes to tell the story, to give its
Is this your interview process?
Course. Well, sort of. I'd gotten a clerkship with the chief judge of the Ninth Circuit, and back then you applied for clerkships, Judge Browning, back in the very beginning of my third year of law school. And I had no interest in New York. I'd never worked in New York. The one time I'd been to New York, I was 10 years old.
Most people do not go from west to east.
But I really wanted to travel, and I'd never really been out of the country, but I was already broke, and it was October. So I figured I needed to make some money over the summer, and I'd arranged all my courses in my third year, so I got out of school very early. And I thought, well, I could go back to a San Francisco firm, or go to another San Francisco firm. I could go to the DC firm that I worked at one summer, or I could look at a New York firm, and the airfares from New York to Europe, where I thought I might go, were cheaper. And I saw this was a firm called Cravath that found you a place to live and paid for half of your rent. So Cravath is the only New York firm I ever interviewed with, and that was the reason I interviewed with them. And I gave them the regular song and dance, and I got a call back, and I repeated that story, and was given an offer, and I came and worked for part of the summer. But to show you that there is such a thing as karma, around March of my third year, I got a call from one of Judge Browning's existing clerks, who said that even though I'd been told I didn't have to start until after Labor Day, I now had to start in July. So then I thought about calling Cravath and saying this was all a joke. And I thought that was a bad idea. I thought about calling Judge Browning and saying, you had promised me September. I thought that was an even worse idea. And so I thought I would just make the best of it, and there must be something in New York worth seeing, and I could sort of sightsee for 10 weeks here and then go off to my clerkship and never see New York again.
So what made you stay?
Well, ultimately, grace. But before that, it was that I noticed that the work at Cravath was different from the two San Francisco firms and the DC firm that I'd worked at. Not that the best work or the best lawyers at those places weren't really good, but the worst lawyers and the worst work at Cravath was really good. And the worst things at the other places were things that I really wanted to avoid. And I still had in mind that I wanted to be a professor, and that the reason that I was going to work at a firm was to get some real-world experience. And the risk of going somewhere and being in one of these places, working with somebody whom, even as a law student, I thought, this person is not a good lawyer. How am I going to learn from this person? That risk was too much.
Well, people always talk about the Cravath system. Who was the first sort of partner that you worked for at Cravath?
So two things happened. So I had 3 weeks left in my clerkship with Judge Browning. And two things happened in rapid succession. One was that Tom Barr, who was the head of litigation
The
department,
legendary
sort of
Tom Barr.
legendary lawyer.
Of IBM fame, among others.
Yep, called me and said,
Mentor of David Boies.
mentor of David Boies, whom I didn't have quite so felicitous an experience with, but that's a whole other story. Tom Barr called me and said, so what are you going to do? Very brusque guy, ex-Marine. What are you going to do? And I said, well, I haven't really made up my mind yet. Here's what I'm thinking about. And he said, well, if you start by September 2nd, you'll be assigned to me and you'll travel to Japan on an IBM matter. And I said, okay, can I have 24 hours to think about it? And he said, sure. And then I got a call, very close succession, from the hiring partner who later became the chairman of the DC firm that I'd worked for. And I'd done a lot of work with him directly, and he had a very different approach. He said, I was just wondering about your decision, if there's anything we do to help. And I said, yeah, if there's, the thing that you could do is tell him, here's what I'm thinking about, and what I really need to know is what would you do in this situation? And he paused for a second, and he said, I would go to Cravath. He said, it's a one-of-a-kind place, and if you end up loving it, you would have done yourself a real disservice not to go there. And if you end up disliking it, you can come, whether it's 6 months later or 6 years later, you can come here or go anywhere else you want, except S&C.
We would have taken you.
And that would have been good to know.
So tell us a little bit about your practice at Cravath.
So I don't know that you can replicate this kind of practice at a big firm anymore. I think maybe these times have come and gone. But I did everything. I was not a specialist. I had antitrust cases. I had securities fraud cases. I had contract cases, patent cases, copyright cases. I counseled clients. It was very much like an old-fashioned practice where I just sort of moved around from thing to thing. And because I get bored very easily, which is why being a judge on the Court of Appeals is a great job. You never see the same thing twice. That's the kind of practice I had. Litigation practice, but sort of all over the place.
What was your favorite case?
There were a whole bunch. One that kind of stands out was I was representing HBO against Riddick Bowe and his promoters in front of Judge Preska. And I was deposing, Riddick Bowe was the heavyweight champion of the world, and I was deposing him. And at the very beginning, I was sort of asking him about some very basic stuff, his height, weight, and reach. And I asked him his reach, and it was 48 inches. And I said, so you can't reach me from where you're sitting? And he said, don't count on it.
This would have been good for a video deposition.
This was before those days, but yes.
Safer.
Yeah. That was a fun case.
Now, you were pretty involved in the Cravath pro bono practice. Tell us a little bit about that.
So, really, until the last 3 or 4 years, I was simply somebody who did a lot of pro bono work. I wasn't responsible for the practice or anything like that. But I did a lot of interviewing at Cravath, and I would tell, students would ask how much pro bono work do you do, and I would emphasize how important it is, and would say I do about 10% of my time is pro bono work. And after a while, I thought, I might be lying. But the people in the accounting department could count this up for me, so I asked them to do that. And it turned out it was 18% over the entire time I was at Cravath. 18% of my time was on pro bono work. And
what was the pro bono case that you sort of was most memorable for you?
Well, it was a very, very long-running case in Birmingham, Alabama, to desegregate public employment in Alabama. Terrific case. It was filed originally by the local branch of the NAACP and a small private firm when I was in high school. And Bob Giuffra.
Yes.
So Bob Giuffra had the case, took it to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1989, and right after he lost a 5-4 decision, Martin v. Wilkes,
famous decision.
I started working on the case, and he handed it over to me as soon as I became a partner. And I worked on it from 1989 till I took the bench.
I had a big case in Alabama, and they have Hugo Black's statue, as I recall, is right as you go in.
Yep.
But it's a place which is, you kind of have to know the local scene to get anything done.
Very much so. Very closed society.
The thing that I always was amused about going to court in Alabama was you would visit with the judge ex parte before the hearings, which I thought was a little bit unusual by New York standards.
Very unusual, and we were lucky because so there were 2 judges who handled this case from 1974 until it concluded in 2021. And the first of those was Sam Pointer. He was the chief judge of the.
Now, he was a
good
draw.
He was a good draw. He was a very good draw, and the rumor was that he didn't wind up with a seat on the 11th Circuit because of this case. And then the second judge, Judge Linwood Smith, was an even better draw. He was not from Birmingham. He was a Huntsville judge. But as the new judge, when Judge Pointer retired, he was sort of given this case as kind of a dog. But he really took it to heart, and because he was not from Birmingham, he was really immune to some of the political pressures down there. But he, we would get calls, or his secretary would, sidle up to one of the associates on the case and will say, the judge will be at the bar at the Tutwiler Hotel around 6 o'clock.
I spent many a night in the Tutwiler. Yep. That is the main hangout yep. in Birmingham. So what was the net result of the case? Was there an injunction entered? Or?
Oh, there were consent decrees entered. There were contempt orders. There were federal receivers appointed over the various different entities, one after another. And it really now has one of the finest testing facilities in the United States as wow. a result of that case.
So now at some point you decide, 30 years of Cravath, you decide you want to become a judge. And, most big firm New York lawyers, they want to become federal judges. You put your name in the hat to become a state court judge. Why?
A couple of reasons. One, I guess, is that I never really saw myself, my personality or even skills, so much as suited to be a trial judge as an appellate judge. I don't want to, stereotype people, but I think a lot of the trial level judges like having a kingdom. And I really like working with other people and being proven wrong about things that I think and having that kind of back and forth. And I really enjoy writing, and I enjoy having a lot of time to think things through. Those are sort of luxuries that appellate judges have that trial judges don't. And so just for me, that seemed like a better job. And then, to be a federal appellate judge is a pretty hard thing. I guess it's pretty hard to be on.
You just need to get one person to go along with you.
Too. Yeah.
Now you've got to get 3.
But yes.
A little harder.
It is harder, but it's...
Don't have to worry about being reversed.
That is very true. The best thing about the job, and I really do think it is a better job than being a federal circuit court judge, is that we have the common law. And the common law is a fascinating thing that the federal courts really don't have. And of course, not all of our cases are common law cases, but a lot of them are, and it allows... I've always been interested in public policy. I was a government major. One of my favorite games as a kid was a game called Landslide. It was an electoral politics game where you tried to become president. There were just lots of things about me and about growing up that like policy. And the common law is in some ways all about policy.
The thing I always think about when I think about the New York Court of Appeals, I think you have the nicest courtroom of any courtroom I've ever appeared in my entire life. It's much nicer than the Supreme Court, which is a little bit like a mausoleum. The Delaware Supreme Court has kind of a Williamsburg courtroom, but your courtroom I think is the nicest, and I'm told that's because of Chief Judge Kaye.
Well, I think it's partly because of H.H. Richardson, the architect. One of the really nice, there's a tremendous
it's
amount
not
of
too big, but
woodwork.
It's not too small.
That's true, but it's also, and I observed, Justice Renwick has got a really nice courtroom in the First Department, right?
That's true.
So I don't really want to go head to head with her on that. But the one thing that Richardson did in designing the courtroom is we sit closer to the eye level of the litigants, of the lawyers, than in any other courtroom that I've been in. And that creates a kind of different dynamic. I really like that. Yes, it's beautiful. The woodwork is beautiful. The courtroom itself is beautiful. But that dynamic conveys a little bit of a different message that I think we, the judges, feel, and I think the lawyers feel.
Now, you have the privilege, I think this must be incredible, of sitting at the desk of Benjamin Cardozo and also Judith Kaye. But Benjamin Cardozo was like the seminal American common law judge. Why do you think he's considered such a great judge?
I think there were a few things. He came at a time when society, it's the peak of the Industrial Revolution, really, and it's the Gilded Age. He's there when America is becoming the greatest country in the world. And the old laws that had been around that came from England needed adaptation. They just didn't fit those times. And he was brilliant. There's no question about that. It's not simply that you could have put anybody at that position at that time and they would have done what he did. But he saw that, he understood it, he was indefatigable, and just was able to transform the law, and people recognized that.
Who are some of your other judicial heroes?
Well, of course, Judge Browning, for whom I worked, and from whom I learned much more from working for him than I did in law school. All sorts of things.
Being a clerk is just a great job.
Yes.
I look back at my own life, and the two best jobs I ever had were being a law clerk.
Yep. And that's one of the reasons that I decided I wanted to become a judge. Is there was a day when He and I were the only ones in chambers, and he was leaving, and he didn't have to leave through my office to go out. That wouldn't have been his normal route, but he knew I was going to be there a long time, and he came out to say goodnight, and he said to me, this is the best job you're ever going to have. And he left. And then he cracked the door open, and he said, unless you have my job someday, and then he closed the door again. And that really stuck with me.
Well, I'm sure he'd be very proud to see you now.
In terms of writers, Justice Jackson, Robert Jackson,
New
I think
Yorker?
is just, and a brilliant writer. I wish I could write like that. I can't. I use too many words.
What is your relationship like with your law clerks?
It was better before I became chief.
Because you had more time to spend with them.
I had much more time to spend with them, and I really did. I spent lots of, we'd have lunch together regularly. They could, would barge into my office, and because I was in chambers all the time. And now I'm not in chambers nearly as much, and I have, things I have to go to at lunches and speak at or eat at, and I've gained weight, which is not a good thing.
Is there a gym in the New York Court of Appeals?
I go to the gym every morning in my building. I'm there for an hour at least, every single day of the week.
I always tell everyone, I think that's like the most important thing when you have a job that's a stressful job is to go work out.
It's the most important thing when you're 63 years old and have a 12-year-old.
And since we're both... I have a 16-year-old and I'm 63. So, you were a commercial litigator for 30 years and, many of the lawyers who are here are active in the commercial division, and in 1995, Chief Judge Kaye spearheaded the creation of the commercial division, and I think Bob Hague is somewhere right over here,
Yep.
and he's been very instrumental in really doing everything to make the commercial division preeminent. What do you think we can do to keep our commercial division preeminent in the United States?
So Bob and I were actually talking about this earlier today after Judge Renwick's investiture. People at big New York firms like yours and mine make too much money.
I'm not going to respond to that.
And they make enough money that at age 55, 57, 60, they could retire quite comfortably. And if one or two of them, and there's Bob over there, if one or two of them or three of them could be appointed by the governor, Liz, could be appointed by the governor to the Court of Claims, they could then be assigned to the appellate division.
Well, that's what happened with Barry Ostrander.
Absolutely.
And it was a home run.
Absolutely, and we need a few more home runs. I think that's something we really could do. I think that, Justice Renwick's first department is phenomenal. I think they understand, and people know that they understand commercial law very well, and they act quickly. They're not cases languishing there, they move really quickly. So, and it also makes their job easier if you have really sophisticated judges in the commercial division. And it's not the case that everybody in that division needs to be from the Court of Claims and had a big law practice or anything like that. Not at all. There are different kinds of cases that come. But with some case management there, you could assign certain types. I mean, for example, and she didn't come from a big practice really, but Marcy Friedman, who was retired,
Yep.
handled all the RMBS cases. And she really knew them backwards and forwards, and they're very complex cases. But once you get the hang of them, you can do a very good job with them. So there's sort of management things you can do, but also I think putting a couple of people whose background, is like yours and mine, on that court gives the commercial bar and large corporations the comfort that they can get here and get a good result with people who understand their businesses and their agreements, and then get quick appellate and accurate appellate review.
No, I mean, when you think about the success of the New York bar and basically the way other law firms from Los Angeles and Chicago are expanding here, I think one of the reasons they do is because we have really good judges and really good courts. It's also because of people like Benjamin Cardozo, and that's why, New York law is the choice of law in a lot of major commercial contracts. And, we're obviously involved in a battle between, us and Delaware, us and London. But it's, everybody in this room really has a vested interest in promoting and supporting our commercial division.
And, I spent an hour earlier this week, I think it was on Thursday, with the Minister of Law for the UK, who was pitching to me and Judge Rivera, who handles these sorts of things for the Court of Appeals, a quicker way to get their barristers admitted to practice here. They want to come here.
Interesting.
Yeah.
No, and you don't have to wear a wig if you come here. That's one advantage. At least they gave that up. What you have, as you noted before, 2 jobs, and I think, I clerked for Chief Justice Rehnquist, and he was out of the office at Chambers at 2:30 every day, went swimming, played tennis with the clerks. That's why we only had 3 clerks, because it was good for doubles. It's totally true, actually. I don't think he actually needed law clerks. Now, serving you're the chief judge of the courts. You're dealing with, the cases and the arguments and the opinions. But then you have to manage a massive, massive court system. On the administrative side, what are some of your priorities?
So it dovetails sort of nicely with some of what the governor was saying. So the specialty courts we have, which are mental health courts, drug treatment courts, the family court, these are all places, and maybe I should step back from this a little bit. It's easy to think about a court as a place where 2 people who have a dispute come, and then you get a judgment, and then people leave. That's sort of a very simplistic way, and not inaccurate. But courts are part of the system of government. And really the question we should all be asking is, how can the government best spend resources to improve the lives of people in the state of New York? And so when a court has someone who's accused of a crime and maybe committed the crime, and they have a mental health issue, for some of those people, the right answer is going to be that person has to go to prison. For some of those people, and it could be the exact same crime, but a different person, the right answer might be that person needs drug addiction treatment, or that person needs mental health treatment. And we haven't been very good, I think, we've taken some steps, but we haven't been very good about really parsing that and really asking how best do we devote those resources. And so if, I've visited, various of these specialty courts. One story comes to mind. There's many like this, but this is from the Midtown Community Court, now called the Midtown Community Justice Center, which is on 54th Street. A guy brandishes a knife and approaches a group of police officers, and when he gets close to them, he says, "Please arrest me, I need help," and he drops the knife. Now, he could be prosecuted for a whole host of things, but instead, he's sent to the Midtown Community Court. He meets with a psychologist. He's given a series of things he's got to do, which include a lot of meetings with psychologists and social workers, and he completes that, and then the charges are gone. And what you hear from the people who work there, I've spoken with Judge Wang, who presides over that court several times, is that some of those people, most of those people, a problem is they have no support system. And some of them, when they find themselves, they've gone through this process, and they find themselves in extremis again, where do they turn? They come back to the court. Nobody's arrested them. They don't have a run-in with the law, but those are the people they know they can count on when they have a problem. So courts can be much more than they are. They can be much more than just, we're going to render a decision and that's that. This isn't a true false or exam. If we think about the courts as part of our system of government, we can do so much more.
Now, there's been a lot of talk about court reform in New York, and a number of chief judges have tried to get court reform through. Do you have any thoughts about what sort of court reform you'd like to see?
Well, there's that old saying, because judges since Breitel, I think, have been trying to consolidate all the various different courts. And I have to admit, look, there's all kinds of different courts, and they've got all sorts of different names, and nobody would design a system like this to start. But there's the old saying, fool me once, shame on me, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. But I would be something like the 6th chief judge to try and do this. And I'm not about to beat my head on the wall. I'm not going to try and consolidate all these courts. There are things we can do in the existing framework to augment them, to think about them somewhat differently, without mushing them all together, which they probably should be mushed together. But the political capital, I don't have it.
So, there's been a lot of talk about burnout among lawyers, particularly so-called, big firm lawyers like the 2 of us. And you've had a great career that spanned Cravath and now the Court of Appeals. And my daughter's here, and she's in college, and there may be some other younger lawyers here. So what advice would you give to, people in college or younger lawyers about how to have a satisfying career in the law?
So do you feel burned out?
No, not at all. I like it.
I don't either. I don't either. And so...
But I think the 2 of us we're in a good position, I think. So there may...
Well, did you ever feel burned out?
Not really.
Yeah. So
but I used to work out a lot when I was younger. But I did think about getting a new job a few times.
Yeah,
I never did it.
I did too. When I was I think about a year away from the partnership decision at Cravath, I got a call from the head of the search committee at Bolt at UC Berkeley Law School saying, we'd like you to come and interview. We've got a bunch of positions. And I said to her, this is my dream job, but there has never been a partner of color at this firm, and I think I've got to stay and see what the decision is. And, even if I become a partner, I'd be really interested in talking with you about this. And she laughed at me and said, we're never going to hear from you again. But the advice really, this is a long way around, but, you only have one life, and it is as long as it's going to be, and we don't know how long that is. And if you find yourself not happy in what you're doing, then it's time to do something else. If you happen to land somewhere, and I'm lucky, I think you've been lucky too, where you landed somewhere, and in my case, it was sheer accident, right? I mean, objectively, why did I come to New York?
You'd still be at San Francisco.
To be able to transfer, to travel, yeah, I'd still be in San Francisco, and I might be miserable. I might have not stayed in law. I don't know what I would have done. But, you do, you make your own luck to some degree, but some of it is luck you don't make. And the important thing, I think, is if however you wind up somewhere, whatever combination of luck and skill and whatever else it is, you wind up somewhere and you wake up thinking, I don't want to go to work. I don't like what I'm doing. Life is too short to continue with that. Find something else to do. It doesn't have to be something that makes a lot of money. It doesn't, it can be whatever it is. I mean, I took like a 95% pay cut to do this job, and it's not because I didn't like the other job. It's because this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and it's a lot of fun, and I think I can do a lot of good for people, and I get to sit here and be interviewed by Bob. And
so now you've obviously been someone who's been a trendsetter your whole life. How would you like to be remembered? Or is it too soon to say?
As alive? I don't think of myself that way. I don't care about a legacy or anything like that. I'm just trying to do my job every day. That's what I did at Cravath for 30 years. That's what I'm trying to do now. If I could do this credit without being on stage or getting any credit, if I could do this job anonymously, that'd be much preferable.
Do you think it's harder to be a chief judge or to be a father of 3 kids?
It's definitely harder to be father of 3 kids. And it's even harder to be mother of 3 kids.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
Grace has
being a parent is a hard job.
She's had a much tougher time than I've had because she's had more responsibility for the 3 of them.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
You've been fabulous. Thank you so much. This was so much fun. So we have dessert in the next room. And, on behalf of the Historical Society, thank you, Chief, for being here. We really want to have you back again. And thank you all for coming, and get your dessert right next door. So thank you all very much.